My name is Alan Workman, and if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said I had a decent life. My wife, Lucy, and I had been married for over 3 decades. I had just turned 55 then, and while we weren't exactly a couple of kids anymore, we had a solid routine going. We both worked hard. Lucy was a manager at a local furniture store, and I ran a small auto shop in town. It wasn't glamorous, but we were comfortable. A house in the suburbs, a couple of vacations each year, the usual stuff. Lucy was beautiful. Even after all these years, she could still turn heads. She had a fire in her that drew people in, this energy that made you feel like she had all the answers. Maybe that's what fooled me for so long. I thought we were a good match, at least on the surface. You know, life can become monotonous after a while. We weren't exactly tearing each other's clothes off every night anymore, but I chalked it up to age. The passion had simmered down, but we had something better, I thought. Stability. We didn't have kids. That was a decision we made together. Lucy had always been career-focused, and while I wanted a family at first, over time, I convinced myself I was content with just the two of us. Our life was calm, structured, and comfortable. I thought that was enough. But looking back, there were signs. Lucy would work late more often than usual, always telling me about some last-minute shipment or staff meeting. She seemed distant, sometimes irritated with the smallest things. She would leave the house early on weekends, saying she needed to clear her head by taking long drives. I didn't question it too much. I had my own hobbies, things to keep me busy at the shop, so I gave her space. Besides, after 30 years, you figure you know your partner, right? You trust them. For a while, I noticed little things that started to gnaw at me. She'd smile at her phone, sending off texts quickly when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, though. I loved Lucy, at least I thought I did. Trust was important to me, and the idea of following her or snooping through her stuff felt beneath me. I never wanted to be that guy. But still, something was off. It wasn't just the late nights. There were the unexplained absences on weekends, the way she'd avoid physical affection, even casual touch. We used to sit close on the couch, hold hands during our walks. But it all stopped. When I asked her about it, she'd brush me off, claiming she was just stressed from work or going through a midlife crisis. She threw around the word freedom a lot, saying she needed time for herself. I tried to be supportive, thinking this was just a phase. I remember this one evening, not too long before everything went to hell. I was sitting in my shop, finishing up some paperwork when she called. Her voice was different, happier, lighter, like she had just gotten out of a therapy session or something. She said she'd be home late, and she sounded excited. For a moment, I thought maybe she was planning a surprise or rekindling our old spark. But then, I heard a man's voice in the background. It was muffled, but it was there. When I asked her about it, she got defensive, told me I was overreacting, that it was just a co-worker dropping something off. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. We hadn't had sex in months. That's when the doubt really started to set in. At first, I thought it was just part of getting older, but it wasn't just the lack of intimacy. It was the coldness in our relationship. The way she'd look at me as if I were a stranger. We were living in the same house, but we might as well have been on different planets. One night, out of nowhere, Lucy came home late, a little drunk, and decided to drop a bomb on me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the channels when she walked in, kicked off her shoes, and grabbed a bottle of wine. She poured herself a glass, then stood there in silence, staring at me for what felt like an eternity. "I've had lovers, Alan," she said bluntly, almost casually, like she was telling me she'd forgotten to pick up milk. I froze. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "Lovers," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, a couple over the years." She took another sip, her eyes glassy and unfocused. "I just needed freedom. You wouldn't understand. Women were different. It's about sexual freedom. We're not meant to be tied down to just one man." I sat there, stunned, unable to process what she had just said. 30 years of marriage, and she was telling me this now. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I couldn't move. My mind was racing, trying to find a way to make sense of it, to justify it. But there was no justification. She had cheated on me repeatedly and acted as if it was no big deal. I didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. My mind was spinning, my heart racing, and the room suddenly felt too small, too smart, hot. Lucy just stood there, swirling the wine in her glass, staring at me like she was waiting for some sort of response. What was I supposed to say? That I was fine with it. That I understood her need for freedom after 30 years of marriage. Finally, I managed to find my voice, but it came out cold, detached. How long? It was all I could ask. How long had she been living this double life while I played the fool? Lucy sighed, almost like she was disappointed in my reaction. "Does it matter? It's over now." I stopped, okay? But I needed it at the time. I felt suffocated. Suffocated. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never once thought of our marriage as a cage. I thought we were equals partners. I had worked my ass off to build a life for us, to make sure we had everything we needed. And here she was, telling me she felt trapped. I didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of me. "Who?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I didn't want to know, but at the same time I had to. I needed to put a face to the betrayal. She hesitated, her eyes darting away for the first time since she had dropped her bombshell. It was a few different guys, nothing serious, just flings. They didn't mean anything. Flings? I spat the word like it was poison. Jesus Christ, Lucy, you don't just casually throw around something like that. She set her glass down on the counter, crossing her arms defensively. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm just being honest with you. I didn't have to tell you, you know. Oh well, thank you for your honesty, I snapped, the sarcasm dripping from my words. How noble of you. She didn't even flinch. Her face was cold, emotionless. You wanted to know what's been bothering me. Now, you know. Bothering her. That's what this was to her, a slight inconvenience, a minor itch she needed to scratch. I felt sick to my stomach, like the floor had just fallen out from under me. 30 years together, and it was all reduced to flings and freedom. I stood up from the table, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. My hands were trembling, fists clenched at my sides as I stared at her. I don't even know who you are anymore. Lucy didn't say anything, just stared back at me with those same detached eyes. It was like she had already made her peace with it, like my reaction didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. That hurt more than anything, the fact that she didn't care. You're right, I said, my voice hollow. I don't understand. I never will. With that, I walked out of the kitchen, needing to put as much distance between us as possible. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest, as I headed upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't even know what I was looking for, maybe some proof that this wasn't real, that this was all some horrible nightmare. But there was nothing. Our room looked the same as it always did, but suddenly it felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands gripping the sheets as I tried to steady my breathing. The memories came flooding back: our wedding day, the house we bought together, the vacations, the quiet nights watching TV on the couch. All of it felt like a lie now, tainted by the knowledge that, for years, Lucy had been betraying me. I had been living in a fantasy, completely blind to what was really going on. As I sat there, trying to wrap my head around it all, a thought crept into my mind. She said it was over, but how could I believe her? How could I trust anything she said now? For all I knew, she could still be seeing someone. The late nights, the secretive texts, the way she'd pull away from me whenever I tried to be close, it all made sense now. She had been lying to me for God knows how long, and now she expected me to just move on like nothing had happened. I stayed up that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my head over and over again. Every time I thought about it, the anger swelled inside me like a tidal wave. How could she do this to me? To us? Was our entire marriage just a sham? The next morning, Lucy acted like nothing had happened. She went about her routine as usual, made coffee, got dressed for work, kissed me on the cheek before leaving the house. I stood there in the kitchen, stunned by her casualness. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but I felt paralyzed. I couldn't comprehend how she could be so calm, so indifferent. It was as if confessing her affairs had lifted a weight off her shoulders, but now I was the one drowning under it. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to push the whole thing to the back of my mind. I buried myself in work, spent more time at the shop, and avoided being home as much as possible. Lucy acted like everything was fine, like we had hit some kind of reset button and were supposed to move forward, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, I saw the faces of the men she had slept with. Every time she touched me, I recoiled. I couldn't even stand the smell of her perfume anymore. And then, one night, she tried to initiate sex. It had been months since we'd even shared a bed, and out of nowhere, she reached for me in the dark. I froze, my body tensing up as her hand slid over my chest. I wanted to shove her away, but I couldn't move. I was caught between anger and disgust, and all I could do was lie there, silent and still, until she finally gave up and turned away. I knew then that our marriage was broken beyond repair. There was no coming back from this, but the thought of divorce terrified me. After 30 years together, what would that even look like? How could I start over at my age? So I stayed. We stayed, out of habit, out of fear of being alone. But deep down, I knew things would never be the same again. A full 2 years had passed since Lucy's casual confession, and things never really improved between us. We existed together, not as a couple, but as roommates who barely exchanged more than a few words a day. I buried myself in work and tried to ignore the growing chasm between us. It was easier that way. After all, who else did I have? The tension was always there, lurking beneath the surface, but we had gotten good at pretending. We still went to social events, family gatherings, and dinners with friends, always putting on the facade of a happy couple. Lucy had an easy way of masking the truth. Hell, she'd probably been doing it for years, but I wasn't as good at pretending anymore. The cracks were showing. I thought I could move on, that maybe in time I'd forget about what she did. But every now and then, the doubts would creep in, gnawing at me. Little things would set me off: her phone buzzing in the middle of the night, the way she'd still work late now and then, or when she'd come home with that familiar smell of wine on her breath. One night, something snapped in me. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV, when Lucy came home late again. It was almost midnight, and I hadn't heard from her since the morning. She didn't bother to text, didn't call. She just walked in, kicked off her shoes, and headed straight for the shower like it was nothing. I didn't say anything at first, but the more I thought about it, the more the anger built inside me. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, stormed into the bathroom, and confronted her. She was in the shower, the water running down her body as if washing away the day's sins. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. Lucy turned, startled, but then her face settled into a familiar expression of irritation. "I told you I had to stay late for inventory at work," she said, not even bothering to meet my eyes. I felt the rage bubbling up inside me. "It's midnight, Lucy. You expect me to believe that?" She sighed, shutting off the water and grabbing a towel. "I don't know what you want me to say, Alan. You're being paranoid." "Paranoid?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think I'm paranoid? You think I don't remember what you told me 2 years ago? You think I'm just going to sit here and take it while you sneak around behind my back again?" She rolled her eyes, a move that only fueled my anger. "I'm not sneaking around. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "Then why don't you let me see your phone?" That caught her off guard. For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "It's my phone," she repeated, her voice a little shaky. "Why?" "Because I want to know what's really going on. If you're not hiding anything, then show me." I was done playing games. I needed the truth, even if it destroyed me. Lucy hesitated, clutching the towel tightly around her body. "You don't trust me," she said softly, trying to guilt me into backing off. It wasn't going to work this time. "How could I?" I snapped. "After everything you've done, how the hell am I supposed to trust you?" She stood there, staring at me, her face hardening. "Fine," she said coldly. "You want to see my phone? Go ahead." "Hud." She walked into the bedroom, grabbed her phone off the nightstand, and tossed it to me. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, the screen lighting up in the dark room. I didn't want to do this, but I had to know. At first, everything seemed normal. Work emails, texts from friends, nothing unusual. But then I saw it a series of messages from someone named Tom. My stomach dropped. The texts were vague, but the tone was unmistakable. Flirty, intimate. I scrolled through the messages, my heart pounding in my chest. They talked about meeting up, about how much they missed each other. One text from Lucy stood out. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The room spun around me as the reality of it hit me. She was still cheating on me. After everything, after she had sworn it was over, she had found someone else, some guy named Tom. I looked up at her, my vision blurred with rage. "Who the fuck is Tom?" Lucy didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her arms crossed over her chest. "He's no one," she said quietly, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. "No one?" I shouted, throwing the phone onto the bed. "That's what you're going with? After everything you've done, you're still lying to me." She flinched at the sound of my voice, but she didn't back down. "It's not what you think. Not what I think." I let out a bitter laugh, the kind that comes when the world you thought you knew comes crashing down around you. "You've been fucking this guy, Lucy? Don't stand there and lie to me." Her expression shifted, then defensive, cold. "I told you I needed freedom. I thought you understood that." "Freedom?" I spat the word like it was poison. "You want to talk about freedom? How about the freedom to not have your wife sleeping around with other men behind your back?" She didn't respond. Instead, she just turned away as if the conversation was beneath her, as if I was beneath her. That was the moment I realized it was over. Not just our marriage, but everything. The trust, the love, whatever was left of it, it was all gone. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I stood there for a long time, watching her as she climbed into bed, pulling the covers up around her like she hadn't just shattered what little remained of our relationship. I wanted to scream, to break something, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a heavy stone. I couldn't stay. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up in a fog. I had slept on the couch, the leather sticking to my skin as I shifted, the stiffness in my neck, reminding me of the hell I'd endured the night before. Lucy had already left for work. Of course she had. That was her way: move past the problem like it didn't exist, sweep it under the rug, and act like nothing happened. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty house. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a prison, a place full of memories that now meant nothing. My mind kept replaying the text from Tom over again. Last night was amazing. It was like a knife twisting in my gut every time I thought about it. After I finally forced myself off the couch, I took a long shower, trying to scrub away the feeling of betrayal, but it clung to me like a second skin. When I got out, I checked my phone. No text from Lucy. No apology. No explanation. You didn't even have the decency to try and fix this. Not that I was sure it could be fixed. I spent the rest of the day at the shop, working on cars and avoiding conversation. My guys could tell something was off, but they didn't ask. They knew better than to pry. It wasn't until late afternoon that I started to think about what I was going to do next. Divorce. It seemed inevitable, but the idea of it scared the hell out of me. After 30 years of marriage, how do you start over? I was so deep in thought that I almost didn't hear my phone buzz. When I glanced down, I saw Lucy's name on the screen. We need to talk tonight. My heart sank. I wasn't ready to talk. Hell, I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. But I couldn't avoid it forever. When I got home, Lucy was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine in front of her. The sight of her made my skin crawl. She looked calm, like she'd been thinking about what to say all day. Meanwhile, I'd been twisting in the wind, trying to make sense of the mess she had created. She glanced up at me as I walked in, her eyes unreadable. "We need to figure out what we're going to do, Alan," I scoffed, tossing my keys on the counter. "Or now you want to talk about it? After all this time, and you didn't rise to the bait. I didn't mean for this to happen." "You didn't mean for what?" I snapped. "For me to find out? For you to fuck another man again?" Or her eyes flickered with something guilt. Maybe, but she quickly masked it. "It wasn't supposed to get this far. Tom didn't mean anything. Not really." "Stop lying, Lucy. I read the texts. You were with him last night. How many times do you think you can pull this shit before I finally walk away?" "I'm not lying," she insisted, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, I slept with him. A few times, but it wasn't serious. It was just something I needed." My fists clenched at my sides, the anger surging again. "Something you needed?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What about what I needed, Lucy? What about us? Do I even factor into your decisions anymore? Or am I just here to pay the bills while you get your freedom with other men?" She didn't answer, just stared into her wine glass like it held the answers to all her problems. "I don't know how we got here," she whispered after a long silence. "But it's not working anymore. We're not working. I'm not working." I felt my heart constrict in my chest. Hearing her say it out loud made it real, made it final. All these years, I'd held on to the hope that we could fix things, that the damage could somehow be undone. But in that moment, I realized how far apart we'd drifted. "So, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You want a divorce?" Why she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something close to sadness. "I don't know. I don't want to hurt you, Alan, but I don't know how to be happy anymore." "Happy?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped my lips. "Is that what this is about? Your happiness? What about mine? What about the 30 years I've put into this marriage, into us? Does that mean nothing to you?" "Of course it means something," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "But we're both miserable, and you know it. We've been pretending for years. You're not happy either." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. She was right. I hadn't been happy in a long time. So not since before her confession. Maybe not even before that. We had both been going through the motions, clinging to a marriage that was long dead, but admitting that felt like giving up. It felt like losing. "I wanted this to work," I said quietly. "I wanted to believe that we could fix it, that we could find our way back to each other." Lucy's eyes softened, and for a moment she looked like the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "So did I," she whispered, "but I don't know if we can." The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. I could feel the weight of 30 years pressing down on me, the memories, the promises, the life we had built together. It was crumbling, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, at the woman I had spent more than half my life with, and I felt the anger slowly drain out of me, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I didn't have the energy to hate her anymore. I was just tired of the lies, the betrayals, the pretending. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice hoarse. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Neither do I." We sat there in silence for what felt like hours. Two people who had once been everything to each other, now reduced to strangers. The house was eerily quiet, the weight of our unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Eventually, Lucy stood up, wiping at her eyes. "I think I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. We'll need some space to figure things out." I didn't stop her. I didn't say anything. I just watched as she packed a bag, grabbed her keys, and walked out the door without looking back. As the sound of her car faded into the distance, I was left alone in the quiet, empty house that no longer felt like home. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door, waiting for the tears to come, but they never did. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel anything at all, just emptiness. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Lucy had been gone for over a week, and the silence was suffocating. I'd always thought of myself as someone who appreciated solitude, but this wasn't the same. This was a heavy, oppressive loneliness that sat on my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. I had spent the last few days trying to distract myself working extra hours at the shop, grabbing drinks with the guys, even catching up on some house repairs I'd been putting off. But no matter what I did, my mind kept drifting back to Lucy. to the years we'd spent together, to the betrayal, to the way she had looked at me that night as she packed her shrine might without saying a word. I should have felt something: anger, sorrow, maybe even relief, but all I felt was numb. Like a part of me had been ripped out, leaving this hollow, gaping wound that refused to heal. I knew the marriage was over. Hell, it had been over for years, but admitting that out loud was another thing entirely. One morning, about 2 weeks after Lucy had left, I was sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at my coffee cup, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucy. Just seeing her name pop up on the screen stirred something inside me, though I wasn't sure if it was pain or resentment. "We need to talk. I'll be by this afternoon." It was a simple text, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. What did she want now? Or more space? A full-blown separation? I wasn't sure I could handle seeing her, but I knew I didn't have much choice, so we couldn't avoid each other forever. That afternoon, I sat in the living room, waiting for her to arrive. I wasn't sure what I expected: an apology, some finality, maybe even a confrontation, but when the knock came at the door, my stomach clenched. I took a deep breath and opened it. There she was. Lucy stood on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and hair was pulled back into a messy bun. There was something fragile about her, like she'd aged 10 years in the 2 weeks since she left. I couldn't help but wonder if I looked the same. "Hey," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She walked into the living room, glancing around like she didn't recognize the place anymore. We sat down, the silence between us thick and uncomfortable. She fiddled with the hem of her shirt, avoiding my gaze. I waited for her to speak, but when the silence stretched on, I finally broke it. "What do you want, Lucy?" I asked, my voice tired, defeated. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something I hadn't expected: regret. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I knew what I wanted, but now, I'm not so sure." I raised an eyebrow, not sure if I was ready to listen to whatever she had to say. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," she sighed, rubbing her hands together nervously. "I've been thinking a lot, Alan, about us, about everything that's happened. And I realized I messed up. I've been messing up for a long time." I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. I thought I needed something more. I thought I needed freedom, excitement, something to make me feel alive again, but all it did was tear us apart. "I hurt you, and I hate myself for that." She paused, her voice cracking. "I don't know how to fix it. Maybe I can't." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the vulnerability in her eyes. It wasn't the cold, detached woman who had thrown her affairs in my face 2 years ago. This was someone who looked broken, someone who knew the damage she had done. "You're right," I said after a long pause. "You did hurt me. You betrayed everything we built together, and I don't know if we can ever come back from that." So Lucy flinched at my words, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I continued, my voice soft but firm. "But I also don't know if I want to end it. I'll be 30 years. That's a long time to just throw away." She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I don't want a divorce, Alan. I don't want to lose you." I felt the weight of her words, but I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow fix this. But the other part of me, the part that had been living with the betrayal, knew that it wasn't that simple. "We can't go back to the way things were," I said quietly. "Too much has happened. Too much has changed." Lucy nodded, looking down at her hands. "I know. But maybe we can start over, try to rebuild something new." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Lucy. I don't know if I have it in me anymore." Though we sat in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. But trust is a fragile thing. Once it's broken, it's damn near impossible to put it back together. Finally, Lucy stood up, wiping at her eyes. "I'm going to stay with my sister a little longer. It give you some more time to think." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she walked to the door, she paused, turning back to look at me. "I love you, Alan. I always have. I just lost my way." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. I watched as she walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, and I sat there alone, unsure of what to do next. Weeks passed, and Lucy stayed away. We spoke occasionally, but nothing was resolved. I could tell she wanted to come back, wanted to pick up the pieces, but I couldn't bring myself to let her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I kept myself busy, trying to move on with my life, but it was hard. Every room in the house was a reminder of what we used to have, of what I had lost. Some nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake, wondering if I should have fought harder for our marriage, for the life we had built together. But then I'd remember the lies, the betrayals, the coldness in her eyes when she had first admitted to her affairs. I'd remember the text from Tom, the way she had carried on with him even after everything had come to light. And I knew, deep down, that things could never be the same again. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, the phone rang. It was Lucy. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. Maybe it's time we let go." I didn't respond right away. I had been expecting this call, but hearing the words out loud still hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't want to hurt you anymore," she continued. "And I don't think staying together is going to help either of us. We've been through too much. Maybe it's time to move on." I closed my eyes, letting out a long breath. "Maybe you're right." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet sniffle. "I'll always care about you, Alan, but I think we both know it's over." It was the truth I had been avoiding for so long, and finally hearing it made the numbness settle in deeper. "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "I guess we do." The divorce was amicable. We divided our assets, signed the papers, and went our separate ways. There were no screaming matches, no ugly court battles. Just two people who had once loved each other, now moving on with their lives. Lucy moved in with her sister for a while, and eventually I heard she started dating again. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. As for me, I stayed in the house, trying to figure out what my life would look like without her. Some days were better than others. There were moments when I felt a glimmer of hope, like maybe I could start over, find happiness again. But then there were the darker days, the ones where the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. In the end, I realized that healing wasn't going to happen overnight. It would take time, maybe years, but eventually I would find my way again. For now, all I could do was keep moving forward, one day at a time.